My name is Dakota Von Koons. I'm the Director of Marketing and Partner Relationships over here at Conzo Software. And it's an absolute honor to introduce Victor Cirilo, a seasoned expert in HUD regulations with a special focus on HOTMA. Victor brings over 2 decades of experience in housing policy and management, ensuring a rich perspective for today's discussion. His leadership in housing authorities and roles in education have made significant impacts in his field. Today, we're set to gain practical insights from his extensive expertise.
Dakota, thank you so much. Your energy is infectious. I'm happy to see so many people joining us. I know we've been putting HOTMA to the side for quite a while now, and but it's time that we really start to focus on deadlines, start editing our plans, and just getting prepared for what's ahead, and also communicating with our clients, residents, so that they know what to expect. So. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for hosting this seminar today. It's great that we can continue the dialogue, and together as an industry, we can learn and prepare ourselves so that we can continue to effectively do our jobs as administrators. So I welcome everyone this afternoon. We're going to get started, and thank you for those housekeeping items. So let's get started. HOTMA, as we know, was enacted in 2016 at this point. So it's been quite a while that this regulatory environment has been in the works, and has been put together. The final rule was published this past February 3. And 2 significant notices for policy folks out there that I strongly recommend that you look into is the latest one, the 2023-27, which is it's a great piece. It gets into detail. It gives you examples of how to calculate, how to address some of the questions that come up under the new setups, and it's a very good resource and a very good tool. Also, I'm sorry, Dakota, I thought you said something. And the other tool is 2023-403. Which it specifically relates to Section 1 of, and that was an update was published recently on November 2nd, 23. The timeframes and implementation timeframe keeps changing, but I think at this point we have some clear guidance as to when we can expect to be compliant, and it all has to do with the new HIT program, which is the successor to PIP. As you may all know, PIP, the PHA Information Center, has been the repository since about 20 years ago, since CORA was put into place back in 1998. HUD is putting together a new system, new servers, the Housing Information Portal. So your software companies will need to be able to send the new 505(h)s into the HIP system. And when that happens is when HOTMA is expected, or will be expected to be compliant with HOTMA. So you have to work with your software companies, and you also have to keep an eye out on where HUD is with HIP. They're making progress. It's not complete yet. But again, the guidance is the housing authorities will need to be fully compliant as soon as the HIP system is in place and your software company is able to transmit those 505(h)s no later than January 1st, 2025. Again, let's go back to that PIH notice 2023-27. You'll get a breakdown. There's a nice guideline there on how to time your compliance, with the trigger being the readiness of HIT. So you can answer any additional questions, implementation dates later on during the presentation. So that's the background. In terms of the actual information today, I think the best way for us to understand HOTMA is to break it down into 3 sections: Section 102, 103, and 104. I found that that's the best practical way of understanding how HOTMA will change the way we perform business. I'm going to mention that Section 103 only applies to public housing. So again, Section 103 of HOTMA will only apply to public housing. Section 102 and 104 will apply to both programs. In that those two sections, the two sections deal with incomes, exclusions, recertifications, etc., applicable to both public housing and the housing choice voucher program. 103 only concerns itself with residents that become over income while public housing participants. Currently, we have a flat rent system that's about to change, and we're going to talk a little bit about that during this presentation. Section 103. So I'm going to start with Section 103, and later on, I'm going to switch to Sections 102 and 104, again, because of the applicability. Section 103, it only applies to public housing. This section breaks down the new over-income rules. So you're going to have to remember that term, over-income, and over-income, public housing over-income families, new acronyms. Like we haven't had enough in public housing. OI, over-income, and over-income public housing families. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The process of calculating over-income families, once you pass those thresholds, the notification process that you need to undertake, and also housing authorities will have a choice to make on what kind of direction you're going to take with the over-income families, or when those families become ineligible in the public housing program. Okay, Section 103. Section 103 of HOTMA will create a limitation on tenancy for assisted families, for those assisted families who become over income for 2 straight years, for 4 consecutive months. You will have to amend your policies, right? Your ACOP and your admin plan. But in this instance, your ACOP. In your ACOP, my recommendation is to put in a chart where you put your very low income limit, and then you're going to multiply that times 2.4. And that's going to be the trigger as to what the numerical figure will be for that family as to when they become ineligible. So we've done admissions and occupancy policy updates for housing authorities. And what we've done is we put in charts. We put in the latest very low income published amount, multiplied to 2 times 2.4, depending on family size. And that's going to be the trigger. So when your families come in to do their research or their annual re-examinations, that income triggers that chart. Then at that point, they're considered over income, and this 24-month clock will begin. We'll get a little bit more into that in a second. What to do after the trigger, after your charts become triggered by the families. So after that happens, you have to certify the family annually, and at that point, I mentioned that the housing authority has to make a determination what to do 2 years after the family goes over income. The housing authority in your ACOP will need to make a determination. Are you going to allow that family to remain in public housing? And in that case, HOTMA guidelines will tell you what to do. You need to create a new non-public housing lease. You need to come up with a rent amount, and those families will no longer be eligible to participate in any public housing activities. That's for housing authorities that decide to allow over-income families to remain in the public housing program. For housing authorities that decide to terminate families after 24 months of being over-income need to be terminated from your program. They have to move out within 6 months. So you as a PHA will need to decide how to handle over-income families. Again, this supersedes the flat rent process that we have into place in regulation currently. Now, if your housing authority chooses to allow families to remain in the units, you have to come up with a new lease, right? And the families will no longer be eligible to participate as I mentioned, in any public housing programs. They can't receive any utility allowances. They don't have to comply with community service, so on and so forth. It's kind of like transferring to RAD. A lot of these public housing rules go away. You won't receive any capital. You won't receive any capital funds. You won't receive any subsidy for that unit. But we are counting that rent that you come up with will be sufficient to cover the expenses associated with administering that public housing apartment. In terms of notices, so if I come in and my income goes over during the annual re-exam, the housing authority will give me an initial letter saying that I have triggered the over income limit and you're going into over income status. After 12 months, come back for my re-exam. And if I'm still over income, I will be given another notice, say 12 months have passed. If at the 24-month period, you still over income, then it'll trigger whatever decision the public housing authority has decided on. So you will have to have these notices in place so that when this happens, currently, again, when your family currently is full flat rent, when a family is flat rented, we would need, in this case, in the over income process, you will need to make sure you notice that. We spoke about the two options that you'll have as a housing authority. As it relates to the rent setting, there's that acronym NPHOI, non-public housing over income families. If you decide to allow families to remain in your programs, you will have to come up with a rent, which is it would be either the applicable fair market rent or the amount published by HUD as to how much subsidy would have otherwise come to that unit. That'll be published under the HOTMA regulation. They had pledged that those limits will be published in the future. So for those housing authorities choosing to allow families to remain in your programs, you will have to assure that these rents are updated depending on when HUD publishes that. We mentioned that that unit would no longer receive capital funds. The family will no longer be re-examined or recertified. The family can reapply to the public housing program and would be eligible for all preferences, including any special preferences. So if my housing authority chooses to continue housing me under a special rent and a special lease, I can always reapply when the waiting list opens. In case my income once again in the future falls under the allow HOTMA by reading those notices. Let's go to section 102. Again, a recap, we left section 103, applicable to the public housing program only, and that deals with over income families and the housing authority's decision on whether you will continue housing families or you will be evicting families that go over the over income limit. Sections 102 and 104, they deal mostly with income and also assets. Applies to both programs. The new definition of income is broad, very broad. I have with me 2 copies of the CFR. The definition of income and assets and re-exams can be found at 24 CFR 5.609. 24 CFR 5.609. Dakota, I have two copies with me. One that is a version prior to HOTMA and a version that will go into effect after HOTMA. I can share this with whoever is interested in these 2 copies. They're very good resources because it breaks down a lot of what I'm about to talk about in terms of income. For example, one of the big changes in the regulation is the older version used to get into detail as to what is considered income. And the new one is just a very broad language, but instead it gets into detail as to what's not considered income and what is exempted. So another useful tool that I recommend that you look into, CFR 5.609. You remember, we all remember the earned income disregard. You may still be implementing that for the public housing families only that had zero income at admission, and they get a job and they start going forward towards self-sufficiency. The earned income disregard policy allows for 100% of new income to be disregarded for 12 months and 50% for the following 12 months for a total of 24 months. That program is going away. So that portion of the regulation is going to go away. It's going to be phased out. Income deductions are changing. This is big. Health and medical expense deductions may be taken for expenses that exceed 10%. Currently, it's 3% of gross annual family income. So as we all know from being a practitioner, if someone's non-reimbursed medical expenses go over 3% of their annual income, then they bring receipts and we can deduct that from the income calculation. That number is going to go up to 10% going forward. So that hurts a lot of seniors. I would think that may be getting medical treatment, health expenses. That's gonna hurt a little bit. So just be mindful that number going up to 10% for existing families is going to be phased in over a 2-year period. For those that are participating currently, We'll get it out. You'll see the chart as to how that's being phased in over that 2-year window. There is a portion of HOTMA that gets into general hardships. Will be extending general hardship options for families that will have a hard time adjusting to this 10% or the child care expenses, or the removal of the child care expense deduction is going to negatively affect them. They no longer pay rent. They can no longer pay rent. You allow the option to extend that up to, I believe it's 90 days. You will see a slide on that in a second. The new income definition under HOTMA, all amounts not specific for each household member who's 18 years of age, and household spouse that had a household any age, plus any unearned income by on or behalf of each minor dependent, actual income from assets or imputed return on assets over $50,000. That's important. Over $50,000. So the total assets have to add up to $50,000 in order for you to count that return as income. We'll get into that in a second. Removes the examples of included income sources and provides a broader definition of income. I talked a little bit about that, how 24 CFR 5.609 the language changes, that gets more into exclusions rather than income sources. Let's see, some add-ons. The new definition, it specifically mentions income from independent contractors, day laborers, and seasonal workers is to be included. Before, there was a vagueness because sometimes income wasn't happening as often. You would just collect it at one time, and some folks are not counting that as income. So under HOTMA, HUD has been proactive in making sure that those three areas are mentioned, and the housing authorities are clear that will be considered income going forward. Exclusions. I mentioned that the new HOTMA regulation gets deep into exclusions. Non-recurring income, such as gifts, census work, tax refunds, economic stimulus payments, etc., not counted. Certain payments to allow individuals with disabilities to live at home, not counted. Principles from trust distributions, regardless of the form of trust, not counted. Payments related to aid and attendance for veterans, not counted. Student financial assistance extended under 479B of the Higher Education Act of 1965. These are financial aid, grants, etc., not counted. For Section 8 program participants, amounts in excess of tuition and required fees are not excluded for heads of households or the spouses. What that means is that if any financial assistance, either through the Higher Education Act of 1965 or some other source, scholarship, etc., goes over the total expense of tuition and expenses required for you to get your education, you get more than what you need, we're going to have to count that as income under the Section 8 program. Okay? Go to your PH notice for additional guidance in that. Training, very important. We talked about how HOTMA is eliminating the earned income disregard. EID, let's call it EID. EID will only be available for families that are existing or were in the program, participating in the EID program on the effective date of the final rule. The effective date of the final rule currently is January 1st, 2024. After that, no new families may be added after January 1st, 2024. So if someone today comes and does their annual re-exam effective December 1st or interim, and their income goes up and they trigger EID, they can stay on for 24 months. But for someone that comes in after January 1st of next year, no more EID. So that'll be phased out. Be mindful of that. So according to what I just said, within 2 years from that effective date that I just gave you, 1126, no family should be receiving the EID benefit. Let's get into assets. In general, income from assets is considered income. If it is possible to calculate the actual return from an asset the PHA uses that amount. If it's not possible to calculate an actual return on asset and the net family assets are $50,000 or less, the imputed income from that asset is excluded. Okay, let's talk about that. What is that saying? If you have the HUD passbook rate and you do your calculation on the return on that asset, and if that asset is less, that the total assets that family owns are less than $50,000, that imputed income is no longer going to be counted as income if the net assets are $50,000 or less. So you have to take the assets first, see if it gets to that $50,000 threshold. If it does, then you count it as income. If it doesn't, then those assets will no longer be counted as income. And that $50,000 threshold, according to HOTMA, will be adjusted every year for inflation. So that $50,000 limit is going to go up going forward. So that's a big change going forward. So be mindful of that. Let's see, deductions. Currently, there's a $480 deduction per dependent under 18. That number will be changing annually. It will be adjusted for inflation. With respect to elderly and disabled families, I believe that number is 400 currently, and that's going up to 525. And that's also going to be increasing every year for inflation. So that's pretty big on the disabled side. That again, that the new deduction is going to be higher. Health and medical expense deductions will remain. We spoke about how that's going to go up to 10%. Child care expenses remain. If your housing authority wishes to implement additional deductions, HOTMA allows you to do that. However, you won't receive additional subsidy. So be mindful of that burden if you do decide to add additional deductions in your policies. Okay, so I mentioned earlier for expenses, the threshold from 3 to 10. Okay, so in terms of the phase-in, for existing families, the number is going to be 5% during year one, and then the following 12 months, that number is going to go to 7.5%, and ultimately to the 10% that HOTMA calls for. Now, for new families, that amount or that threshold will be 10% from the get-go. Okay, so again, these are for folks whose income who triggers these expense deductions. Mostly, a lot of our seniors and a lot of disabled families tend to fall into these categories, and it could be affected. But HOTMA recognizes that, and they've been able to put in that phase in. The child care deductions can continue. HUD doesn't get into threshold amounts. They just will allow you to extend any reasonable child care expenses. Make sure that documents are valid, that the expenses are actually being incurred, etc. When you come up with a deduction in your calculations. In terms of hardships, I spoke about hardships, how if a family, and you will have to put this in your new ACOP and admin plans, if you will be extending for a hardship situation, you'll be extending the time frame for the deductions cannot be more than 90 days. Again, 90 days is the threshold. HUD will allow you to have hardship exemptions for folks whose deductions are removed, and they run into issues as a result. That was section 102. And at this point, we're going to move to section 104, just to revisit 102. It is mostly about income. We spoke about deductions. We spoke about the elimination of the earned income disregard, among some other issues. Now we're going to move on to section 104. Some of the key points in section 104, the definition of assets has changed, now defined as all family assets with certain exclusions. This is interesting. HOTMA introduces a new asset limitation. Families can now receive benefits if they have over $100,000 total assets or ownership in real property where the family could live. We'll get into that in a second. It allows for housing authorities to have a self-certification process for those families whose assets are under $50,000. There are new rules on how income is calculated. And the housing authorities are extended the right to use what they call mean-tested federal public assistance programs income determinations. What that means is that if the income has been determined by another sister federal agency, the housing authority, if they put it in your plans, you will be allowed to use that determination as income for your recertifications. We'll get a little bit into that in a second. And lastly, HOTMA places restrictions on when an interim re-exam may be completed. We'll talk about that. There's a 10% trigger. I'm going to get into that. So I'm trying. This is the way I found to better understand HOTMA. Just understand the big picture. I'm going over the big picture right now, the big issues, and later on, in the future, we'll get more into detail. I mean, we can do an entire webinar on one of these issues, right? Especially the ownership and the $100,000 in total assets. So we have to start digging deeper eventually. But today we're just talking key points and big picture. Net family assets exclusion. Net family assets exclusion. Net family assets under HOTMA is defined as the cash value of all assets, except those that are excluded. The value of necessary items of personal property, for example, medical devices or cars that are used for commuting, those are excluded. Determining what is a necessary item for personal property is a specific determination, and therefore creating a list in the regulation would be inappropriate. So HUD here tells us that they don't want to define necessary item, they leave it up to you. So when you start putting together a list of net family assets for the purposes of seeing it at $100,000 triggered, they'll leave it to you to define what's necessary, right? A car for commuting purposes for families to get to their jobs. I would think that's necessary to take their kids to work, etc., so on and so forth. So you will have to determine in your plans and in your policies how to define necessary items. HUD will provide more guidance on that issue in the near future, as they promise in the HOTMA regulation. The value of non-necessary items of personal property are excluded when they have a combined total value that does not exceed $50,000 as adjusted. We mentioned that about earlier in section 102, how if the total assets do not exceed $50,000, then you will not be counting that as income. Some examples of exclusions from that net family asset calculation: the value of real property that the family does not have the effective legal authority to sell. I don't know, it could be in a legal entanglement, it could be part of percentage of owned with other family members or with other business partners, etc. Interest in Indian trust lands, any retirement plans will not be counted as for the purposes of net family asset calculation. Including IRAs, employer retirement plans for self-employed individuals, 529 student accounts or savings accounts, baby bond accounts, etc., family self-sufficiency accounts. So you're not going to be counting that as an asset under the HOTMA regulation, section 104, federal tax refunds. Some of this is already in existence. Whenever someone receives a tax refund or stimulus checks, we usually don't count that under the old regulation. Any amounts recovered in civil action settlement on a legal case will not be counted as part of the net family asset calculation. A trust fund, non-revocable trust fund, not under the control of any of the family members, will not be considered a net family asset. And I mentioned how housing authorities will be allowed to have families self-certify if their net family assets are under $50,000, or your policy can say, even if the total net family assets for the families do not trigger that $50,000 threshold, we're still going to be doing third-party verification. So you will have to outline that in your policies. Make a determination. HOTMA introduces the new restrictions on families receiving benefits for both programs based on net family assets. So We spoke about the $100,000 threshold, and we spoke about the exclusions. This new number. So if a family's total net family assets if that calculation is over $100,000, the family can no longer participate in the programs, and that number is going to be adjusted annually for inflation. By the housing authority will not be able to waive that asset requirement, but you can delay, allowing the family up to 6 months to mitigate the situation. So if somebody's total assets go over or triggers that are $100,000, you can allow, if you put it in your policy, the families up to 6 months to address that situation so that they're not evicted from participating in the programs. This section also speaks to ownership of real property. So if you own a home and that home is suitable for occupancy, the family can no longer participate in the program. I mean, you've heard about participants of public housing in section having another home as an asset. If that's the case and the family in that property is suitable for occupancy, the families will no longer be able to participate in the programs. So let's see. There are exemptions. There are exceptions to this rule. Some include if that home is part of a home ownership option, or if it's a manufactured home. Those are exempted from this regulation. If the participating family jointly owns it with someone else, and that someone else occupies the property, that property will be exempt from this regulation. Victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, VAWA victims will be exempted if they own property, and a family that is offering the property for sale will be exempted from this regulation. So one more thing I wanted to add, I think that the key point here is suitable for occupancy. So what comes to mind is if it's a commercial property, I don't think that would trigger this, because that commercial property is not suitable for occupancy because they can't live in. Other triggers, if we start thinking deep into this quote suitable for occupancy clause, if the family requires 4 bedrooms and the home only has 1 bedroom or 2 bedrooms, that would not be suitable for occupancy. So there's a lot of thinking for us to do that we have to do going forward with respect to this new regulation. So let's move forward. We spoke about how the HOTMA regulation allows us to use income determinations from some of our other partners, TANF, Medicaid, SNAP, etc. Just make sure that if you do decide to use other determinations as income, it has to be in your plans. We call this the safe harbor regulation. Make sure that this is reflected in your admin and in your ACON going forward. Lastly, we're going to talk about reexaminations in this 10% threshold. This is it's a little bit, you can get a little bit confusing. The HOTMA regulation says that, okay, let's talk about families whose income increases, right? Whose income increases by 10% or more, they would need to come in for a re-exam. Okay. So, you know what? I think it's better if I read the slide just so that we can all follow better, more effectively. The PHA must conduct a full interim re-exam if the family's adjusted income is estimated to have decreased by 10% or more. Okay, so this is the decrease provision. We'll start with decrease. Forget about what I said about increase. Still gonna keep that 10% in our mind, but let's talk about families that experience a decrease in income. So, as we know, when a family's income decreases, then their rent has to decrease as well, right? Because the new calculation will show that the rent amount will have to go down because no more income's coming into the family. Currently, the HOTMA regulation reads that change has to decrease by 10% or more in order for an interim re-exam to be done. So you, as a housing authority, when a family comes in and reports a change in income, we'll have to do a calculation, and you have to find out if the decrease is 10% or more. If that's the case, then you would do an interim. If not, then you will just note it in your file, and you will not be doing an interim. So that is a new regulation. I'm sorry, a new HOTMA option. Housing authorities can lower that amount to down to I believe less than 10%, down to about 5% on that trigger. If you want to be more generous to your family, so if myself, Victor Cirilo, if I see a decrease in income and my decrease is 8%, I have to go to the housing authority, report it. However, the housing authority does not have to do a re-exam because it's not 10% or more, unless in their policy they lowered that threshold to help me out. So that's on decreases. HOTMA on increases reads the PHA must conduct a full interim re-exam of family income anytime the adjusted income is estimated to have increased by 10% or more. So when income goes up, right, then rent should go up, right? And except PHAs may not consider earned income in estimating whether the adjusted income is an increase unless, based on the PHA written policy, the family received an interim reduction during the same certification period. Okay, so what this is saying is, if my income goes up by 10%, then technically the housing authority under HOTMA will be doing a re-examination and my rent would go up. Under HOTMA, there is a clause that says that unless in between annual re-exams, I've had a reduction, then that calculation will be performed. If for some reason I didn't have a deduction in that gap between annual re-exams, then you're not required to do that re-exam until the anniversary date. So you're giving people a break, basically. So if let's say that my income went up, but I didn't receive an interim reduction between re-exams, then the housing authority is going to give me a break and wait until my anniversary date to actually redo the calculation. So you will have the option of implementing this clause. But make sure it's in your policy. What this 10% threshold is doing in some ways is allowing housing authorities the ability to postpone. In one instance, give families the opportunity, give your family some breaks, and also postpone having too many interim re-exams done and just wait for the annual trigger. I hope I explained that well. Sometimes it can get a little bit confusing. So that's the new HOTMA regulations and re-exam. The notices do a good job. These resources do a good job in providing additional in examples of what I just described. I highly recommend that you go to the HUD Exchange website, hudexchange.info. They have a significant amount of resources there. You have the time. If you are a supervisor, an executive director, and you need to start planning your HOTMA implementation, there's some resource sheets in there per section, so 103, 102, and 104. There's examples, calculations. There's you can find sample notices on over income families, so on and so forth. So I highly recommend that you visit that, and also the two notices. Let's talk about next steps. We kind of got into the implementation, the expected implementation date, no later than January 1st, 2025. You look at PIH notice 2023-27, you will see a sample calendar that will help you plan for this implementation, either January 1st, 2025 or prior. I recommend that you look at that chart. But now you have to start thinking about updating your policies to implement what I just described, for recertification, the new 10% threshold, the assets threshold, the real property issue. One of the hardest things that I found to break down in policy was the over income family issue. We recently did a couple of housing authorities, we updated their policies, and we came up with a nice chart and a good guidance, but it took a while. So start looking at that. Just don't forget that you have to update those policies. You have to go through your PHA plan process in order to, as you know, in order to make any changes to your plans, or if you're in between, depending on when you decide to implement HOTMA, it triggers the substantial deviation clause, 45 comment period, etc. If you will be changing those policies in between annual plan dates. Make sure your forms are updated. You have to start planning on that. Forms, remember also that there's a new program, the HIT program. You're no longer going to have HIT. So start preparing for that, and training, because before we know it, 12 months will have passed. So start planning for that as well. And Dakota, that's the end. I don't know how we did on timing. Hopefully I hit the main issues, and I've guided our participants to go into some of the resources that are on.
And there you are. Beautiful. And we will just start running questions at you. Now, this one, Miss Shannon, the question is this also going to affect how disability expenses are calculated? We may need a little bit more information on that, or do you understand what that entails, Mr. Victor?
Our disability expense, no, not the calculation itself, but yes and no. I mean, I try to understand where the question is coming from, but yes, because disability, there is an allowance, right, for a disabled family. So in essence, I mean, if we think about it technically, yes, it will affect it, because that number is going up to the $525 amount. So it will affect our calculations on disabled participants.
Okie dokie. Going forward, will new tenants that are added to the system be at the 10% when doing the initial 5/8?
Yes.
Okay.
They don't have that phase-in window. New families are coming in at 10% right away.
Wonderful. And then there is a few questions regarding Conzo, and as far as what we will be ready for and what we won't be ready for. Our experts on that aren't on here, so we will be following up with you, everyone there, afterwards as far as their email. So just know we will get back to you, but we're going to keep utilizing Mr. Victor over here. Next, dependent deductions will remain at $480, but elderly and disabled will be increasing to $520, correct?
Yeah, hold on to that question. Someone just posted a comment on a follow-up comment on that, on the 10%.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And it read, and it disappeared from my screen, but let me see if I get this right. It read that, but if we're not in HOTMA, should we be implementing that 10%? And the answer is no. Right now, you stick with the 3%. Until you set your implementation date for your housing authority, then new applicants will be calculated under that 10% amount. Okay, hopefully that clears it. Yes, you're not in HOTMA right now, so today everyone's still being calculated at the 3%.
Wonderful. And it disappeared, but you answered it verbatim of the way that it was asked. So congratulations to that. Okay, we will keep moving. So back to my original question, dependent deductions will remain at $480, but elderly and disabled will be increasing to $525. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. Yep.
Okay.
They're very clear, and it'll be adjusted annually for inflation. So that number is set for that first year, but going forward, that number is going to continue to go.
Will the system automatically change the medical deduction percentage age as recertifications occur?
That's a great question. That's a question for you.
Well, then we will.
Yeah. What they're asking is if they're automatically changed. I believe it's a technical question. That's what I understand it from. But yeah, your software program will have those changes, and that's why this has been delayed, because your software program has to be able to undertake the new HOTMA regulations and then calculate according to these new numbers.
Beautiful. Sounds great. Where does a 4K fall into assets?
1K is exempt from I'm trying to picture one of our slides is exempt from assets. It's exempt from your net asset calculation. Remember, we spoke about how you have to do a calculation and make sure that your net assets do not go over 100 grand. If it goes over 100 grand, then you disqualify for participation. But a 401k program is exempted from it.
Perfect. There was a question, will we be sharing slides from this training? Answer, yes. We are planning on sharing slides. Moving on. Next, so if someone sells their home for over 100K and invests money into CDs, they are considered over asset and would have to be terminated? Question mark.
It would, at that point, that calculation, that situation moves into the asset question, right? It becomes an asset, a CD worth $100,000, right? And that's it. Yeah, if the CD is 100 grand, it's not an exemption, so it will be counted in the asset calculation. There are other ways that income from the selling of real estate could be structured. There's tax. There's other ways. So we can do, like I said, an entire webinar. So I don't think you're going to start seeing a lot of families because there are a lot of very good, accountants that will be able to figure out a way to see that this income derived from the selling of real estate can be structured into one of those instruments exempted from the asset calculation. So yeah. I think that ultimately there will be some workaround, but at the beginning, you may see a lot of folks being disqualified.
Beautiful. Will there be a spend down period with everything that we were just talking about?
When I take that to mean spend down, like a family will start curing their financial situation so they don't trigger any disqualification clause. Is that, I'm trying to understand that. That's what I take that to mean. A spend down, that people are going to start selling their homes or their assets so that they don't trigger these rules. Right?
I'm unclear on that. Miss Fran, if you would like to respond to that in the...
right.
Please feel free.
Yeah, there is a 6 month, if we stick to that train of thought, there is a 6 month period that is extended to the participant to cure the situation and figure out a way to get under the $100,000 threshold.
Okay, perfect. For the asset limitation, how would a family come into compliance? Wouldn't that be considered a disposal of assets and be counted for 2 years, or do you not include the asset disposal into the calculation?
Can you read that first part of that question?
Yes, sir. For the asset limitation, how would a family come into compliance? Wouldn't that be considered a disposal of asset and be counted for 2 years, or do you not include the asset disposal into the calculation?
I see. Well, if someone disposes of an asset, look, at that point, it's hard to answer because it depends on, how that asset is disposed. There's a bunch of exemptions that have been added to the regulation. So if it's, say, invested in one of those instruments that is exempted from the list that I gave you, you would be able to, quote, hide, right, that income coming in from the disposal of the asset. But, yes, existing processes on the asset, the inclusion of that asset still applies. So you will still count that, but unless, that money is invested into one of those instruments currently excluded under the proposed regulation. Hopefully I answer that.
Okay. Miss Fran coming in again. She's done some dingers. It's amazing. So we can give them 6 months to spend the proceeds from selling their house. Can you give money to their children? Because that still counts for 2 years as we do it now.
I can't answer that. I wouldn't know the answer to that. That's a great question. I will have to look into that, Dakota. That's a tough one, but yeah. So because I'm not sure on that remark. If so, if it's deeded to a family member, right? I I I mean, I will think that the family is not getting any proceeds from that, right? Because you're disposing of the asset and extending that to a family member. So it's hard to answer. I can't answer that.
Sure. No problem. We'll make sure and follow up with you. Will the cash value of the whole life insurance still be considered an asset?
My understanding is that that's exempted. It's part of the retirement plan and 401k. It's included in that list. So take a look at that list of exclusions in the new 24 CFR 5.609. It may fall under a retirement plan under that definition.
Okay. Is there a base definition for the hardship definition?
No, HUD is providing PHAs leeway on describing what is a hardship exemption in their jurisdiction.
Okie dokie. What would an increase in income be if not earned income?
What would an increase in income be if it's not earned income? Okay, so if it's not earned income, unearned income is income that is not derived from employment. It's derived, let's say, like tennis or like an assistance program. That's considered a pass-through income. It's not earned.
Okay, perfect. For the 10% threshold for interns, will EIV be taking this into consideration for monthly income discrepancy report or discrep report? Or would we just have to make a good notes on those reports monthly?
So the question is if the EIV process will be changing. No, you will still need to continue doing your EIV checkups according to what your MOU states or your policy states. But to speak to the issue of the family coming in, the recommendation is that you, regardless of whether or not the 10% will be triggered, you condition your families through policy or otherwise to come in every time there's a change. If the change in income does not trigger that 10%, just make your notes and document that in your file and let the family know that in a particular instance, either decrease or increase did not trigger the 10%. You may want to do third-party verifications if that's part of your policy, but with respect to just EIV in general, that's not changing. It doesn't change anything.
Okay. Is there going to be some help given to us on writing and updating policies for HOTMA, and how will we be getting these?
Yeah, you know what? In the one of the the PAH notices, how it does mention that they will in the future provide guidance on language that may be used to update the plans. The policies, but that's all. My recommendation is that whatever system you have in place currently at your agency, start contacting them, or if you do it internally, get your policy team together to start looking into HOTMA and drafting whatever changes. Just as an example, we've done policy updates for housing authorities, and thankfully the policies are computerized, and we're able to go in and just change all the entries that HOTMA is amending, and then we just provide a marked version and a non-marked version to the PHA. It's a lot of work. It's a significant amount of work because a lot of sections, chapters of the policies will be triggered. So I wouldn't wait. I guess to the question, I wouldn't wait for HUD guidance. I would contact or get together with other teams have performed updates to your policy in the past.
Wonderful. Will Conzo provide training on software changes? Absolutely. Whether it's through one of these as far as a webinar, or it's through our software itself and giving you clear instructions on how to do it and do your own training and trainings with us, 100%. Next, Miss Fran, she was responding to one of your questions earlier, but if you're not totally on HOTMA, how can the new tenants be at 10%?
Okay. So to better, I guess, let me just provide a big picture in a review of that 10%. I don't know. Are we talking about the 10% threshold on medical deductions, or we're talking about the 10% re-examinations? I think we're talking about the 10% trigger on. Yes, thank you. Non exactly medical, correct. So right now, everybody, right? Because nobody's in the. I don't think anybody that I know is currently implementing HOTMA yet, right? Because HIP is not yet up. HIP is that the software program I mentioned by HUD. Everybody should be at 3% currently. Everybody, right? So if what that means is that if the aggregate amount of medical expenses are equal to more than 3% of your income, that'll be deducted from your calculation. So right now, stay under 3%. And then when HADMA comes in, new participants into your program will have to, that trigger is going to go up to 10%. We don't phase it. Existing families today that are at 3%, right, will go up to 5% when your local HOTMA regulations are triggered. So they're going to start 5%. Now that trigger is going to be 5. That number, that threshold amount that triggers medical exemption allowances will be 5%. And in the next year, for current families again, it's going to go up to 7.5%, ultimately to 10%. But right now, 3%. Don't know if that answers the question.
Well, Miss Fran will let us know.
Yeah.
All right. So
or communicate offline. I don't mind. Engaging more and getting more into detail. Thank you.
Perfect. We are an HCV only PHA. Does HOTMA allow PHAs to continue to process all income changes in terms as they are reported and verified if we choose?
No, that's HOTMA is applicable to all housing authorities, whether they're just public housing and Section 8 or they're Section 8 only. Everybody, it affects everybody. So there is no provision.
Okay, perfect. What does the term full interim recertification mean? All income, assets, expenses need to be verified when an IR is needed? Sure.
That is correct. I'm sorry. Did you say interim re-exam or you said
interim recertification mean? Full interim recertification mean?
Yeah, exactly. Full interim. So if that 10% is triggered and you do a full interim for Victor Cirilo because his income has gone up over 10%, and you have to go back and then redo the whole calculation for it. You have to confirm all the income, assets, etc.
Beautiful. Is alimony exempt from income?
Alimony exempt from income under HOTMA. Alimony is, I didn't see that on the list of exemptions. What I did read was that only the amount that is received is counted as income, not what the legal note reads. So, for those folks that receive alimony or child support, if you have a court order of a certain amount, you can't count that. You have to count the actual in order to calculate what the expected amount is for the following year.
Okay. What are the 3 hardships? And I believe that was a response from something we were talking about just moments ago.
Sure. The hardships, exemptions. That was in the conversation of the child care and on the conversation of deductions for expenses, unreimbursed expenses. So what HUD is doing is they're allowing existing families receiving those expenses to phase in. So that's an example of one example the hardship clause that is put in for families so they don't get hurt significantly. The other one is to allow for families receiving child care, for example, to be able to provide a reason why removal of that child care expenses going forward affects them significantly. And it's up to the housing authority to define what would trigger that hardship exemption, allowing the family to continue receiving that child care deduction. So it's a subjective definition depending on your jurisdiction. You would have to come up with what would be considered a hardship for the purposes of child care. It is very subjective, but for the purposes of the medical expense, during my presentation, I mentioned that HUD is phasing that in. That they recognize that will be a hardship for families and for existing families. But however, for new families, that number will remain at 10%.
All right. Which form would have to be changed?
Which forms? It depends. It depends on what kind of forms your housing authority utilizes. You just have to take these three sections that I mentioned, 103, 102, and 104, and think about how your whatever existing forms you use will need to be changed based on the different areas that HOTMA is triggering. So I can't answer that question. It's based on what you utilize at your specific housing authority and how your particular forms are structured.
Okay. Is there a full list of asset exemptions available?
Yes. You can go to the PIH notice that I mentioned, 2023-27. And also, if you want to go into a deeper dive, go to the Code of Federal Regulations, 24 CFR 5.609. And there you're going to get the actual language, the nitty-gritty of the new rule. Remember that if you go online and you look for this CFR, you may find the old version. So make sure you find that there are new versions of the 24 CFR 5.609. The code, I can make this available to both the old and the new, so housing authorities can support if you have a way to get this to our participants.
I will, and I'll make it available.
Perfect.
Everyone that showed up today will have access to what you're discussing. Okie dokie. Next question. Our PHA just did an overhaul of our ACOP, ACOP, and are ready for HOTMA. Can we make the HOTMA policies into effect sooner rather than waiting until I'm assuming HUD says what the latest HUD rollout date is?
Yeah, that's a great point. And kudos to that housing authority for being proactive and having these regulations in place. But unfortunately, in this specific case, the trigger is that the Housing Information Portal, HIP, is not yet ready. HUD does not have the new PIC ready for HOTMA implementation. So until your software program can forward that data under the new HOTMA regulations, you will remain on hold. Even if you already implemented changes, what I recommend for this particular PHA that's ahead of the curve, first row in the classroom, just train your staff. If you haven't already done so, train your staff and work with your residents. Make sure that the residents understand what's coming out. And just wait until supposedly, according to the 2023-27, it's supposed to give us an update very soon on the implementation plan for it.
Okay, beautiful. Does Section 2 and 102 and 104 apply to RD and multifamily?
Multifamily, correct. Yep, absolutely. RD, I can't speak. I honestly, because I'm more public housing in Section 8, I don't know what RD is, but definitely for multifamily housing.
I believe RD is rural development.
Rural development? Yes.
I believe so.
Yes.
Okay. So it does apply to both of those.
Definitely multifamily housing, rural development. I've seen that on the list. So Yep.
Okay. Okay, beautiful. All right. We have three more. Man, we had 30 minutes of actually a little even over 30 minutes of question and answers. What a great time.
Yeah, the best part is questions and answers sometimes, you know?
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get into it. We have Miss Fran. She's coming in with another one. But even come January 1st, hardly anyone will have HOTMA fully implemented. You have to wait for your software and HIP to be ready in order to put new tenants at the 10% for medical, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, beautiful.
So to that question, again, to the participants, just go into, I'll keep repeating that 2023-27, there's a little chart and it tells you, once the coder, right, tells you our software is ready, HIP is ready, you will pick one of the implementation dates. They give you examples in there, January 1st, 2024, February 1st, 2024, March 1st, etc. And they tell you when you should change your PHA plan based on your implementation date, and when your policy should need to be in place, and what your actual target will be. So first, you have to put an implementation. You have to select an implementation date when your software gives you the green light. You select your implementation date, and then you go into your PHA plan process and you update policy, et cetera, et cetera. For those that want to get ahead of the curve, I would change the policies now, right, just to prepare. Then once the coda or the software environment tells you ready to go, you're already ahead of the curve, and you already maybe have changed those or had those plans approved by your residents and your board.
Beautiful. So they're still coming in. So we still got two more. We're going to try and squeeze them in. Are we supposed to be using the new 1/1/2024 HUD 9886 as of January 1st, or not until we adopt new policies and official rollout of HOTMA?
So until HOTMA is implemented.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Most changes will require public hearings and board approvals. That's
yeah, because you have to change your ACOP and your admin plan, and that requires board approval.
Amazing. Well, as long as there's no more questions, we will wrap things up. I will announce now the winner of the Starbucks gift card. I actually had a randomization of the person who was going to win, and because of all the lovely questions, Miss Fran, I don't want to mess up your name, Manka, you are definitely it. You're getting the gift card. You came to play today, so congratulations, you did it. You're going to win the gift card. And man, oh man, just thank you all so much. This is the biggest turnout that we've had thus far on our webinars, and it was just a really, really beautiful experience. So thank you all so much for coming. Victor, thank you so much for your expertise and doing 30 minutes of the hot seat and answering questions. That was beautiful. And again, just a wonderful, wonderful day.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Hopefully, we're able to assist each other in moving forward and creating or adapting this new HOTMA environment into our jurisdictions and our housing agencies. Appreciate it.
Amazing. And I will be sending out slides and then the things that Mr. Victor was mentioning before for everyone that showed up. So that will be going out sometime next week. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you guys at one of our next webinars. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody.